I am pleased to have Michael Lewis back at this table. Welcome.
Thanks for having me back.
Does this book so far exceed your expectations as a story that people are galvanized by?
Yes. I was a little worried about it.
Yeah.
But I was a little worried about it because the subject matter is complicated. And with The Big Short, I had a story that was kind of similar. Someone saw the people who saw what was happening and could describe what was happening to an ordinary reader. Yeah. But with The Big Short, people had the financial crisis they needed explained for them. And this is a crisis, kind of a looming crisis, something that may happen, and it's a rot on Wall Street and in the stock market, but it's so subtle that people aren't completely aware of it, and so I worried that it wouldn't resonate a little bit.
Now, you expect this book will change behavior because you have said, if this doesn't change behavior, then I don't know what I'm doing.
I do feel like at some point, what do you have to do to get people to address the problems in our financial system? I mean, I think that, it starts with institutions that are too big to fail. I don't really understand that. How do you have a group of people operating by different rules than the rest of the economy? But that people could think it was right to organize the stock market as a kind of two-tiered thing, with some people having special access and advanced word of prices and so on and so forth, and everybody else just taking it. It's just shocking. So I guess I feel like all I can do is be the messenger. Or find the messenger, find the characters to tell the story. If people don't actually care enough to do anything about it, then what's the point? There are a lot of things
to write about this.
There are a lot of things to write about. There are a lot of great stories in the world. The Wall Street happens to be a gift that keeps on giving, and there are some wonderful stories to tell here. But why write books about Wall Street as opposed to about something else if this is just going to be nothing but entertainment?
There's also this. Many people say that what you have shown is just one part of what's wrong with Wall Street and the financial system, that there are a lot of other things there that are wrong.
Look, if you looked at this kind of the big headlines since the financial crisis, you see a pattern. And the pattern is there's a kind of systematic meddling in the markets, a rigging of the markets. You have the LIBOR scandal in Britain, the rigging of foreign exchange rates. It kind of feels like one after another. Commodities manipulation. So this story feels of a piece with what seems to be happening more generally. And the question is why? Why is this happening now? And I think there's a reason for it. I think that this story kind of shows it in a very detailed way, that technology has, to a large extent, eliminated the need for a lot of what Wall Street used to do. So we don't need people to bring buyers of stocks together with sellers of stocks. They are they can be brought together in a single black box without people.
And high frequency trading is now 50% of what happens on the New York Stock Exchange.
Yes. But the broader point is that if like the old sources of revenue and profits for Wall Street are being eaten away at by information technology, the street has to respond by finding ways to capture revenue. It's sort of the rigging of markets is a response to a decline in their natural usefulness of the institutions at the heart of capitalism. I think that's true.
How did you find the story?
It was curious. I've said now, I think 3 times that I was never going to write another book about Wall Street, and they keep walking in the door, these stories. So this started when I got interested in the story of Sergei Aleninkov, a Russian computer programmer who had left Goldman Sachs, mailed himself some computer code. He was a high-frequency trading programmer at Goldman Sachs, and was pretty instantly arrested by the FBI and ended up being sentenced to years in jail, and spent a year in jail before his conviction was overturned. And I just followed that story in the paper.
And where did you think that story would lead you? Did you look and say, if somebody would do this, there must be a lot of money involved and something is going on here about those codes if Goldman Sachs was so concerned about losing them?
Yeah, so I had 2 thoughts about it. One was when they arrested him, the prosecutor said that he should be denied bail. He should be kept in prison because this code that he took, if it gets into the wrong hands, can be used to manipulate or undermine global financial markets. And I thought to myself, Goldman Sachs is the right hands? I mean, you know, like how much worse could the hands get for the code? And then I thought, you're telling me there's computer code that can be used to sink the global financial markets? How can that be? What is this stuff, this high-frequency trading? And then when he was sentenced to the 6-year or 7-year prison sentence, and you saw this financial crisis come and go, with which Goldman Sachs had a lot to do, and you see that the one person from Goldman Sachs who gets sent to jail after the financial crisis is the guy that Goldman Sachs wants to put in jail. All that seemed to me material. I didn't know where it was going to lead. But the first question, of course, I had after I got in touch with Sergei Lenikov and he agreed to talk to me and tell me his story and let me tell his story was, what is high-frequency trading? I mean, the term gets thrown around. But like a lot of Wall Street creations, it gets created and everybody wants to pretend like they understand what it means. But in fact, nobody really understood what it meant. And it was a term of art that really only entered into the public discourse when Sergei Lenikov was arrested. I mean, he was described as a high-frequency trading programmer and said, oh, yeah, there must be something called a high-frequency trading programmer. But it was never explained. So I needed someone to explain that to me. And that led me to the subject. The subject, because what I did is I called some investor friends and I said, do you know what high-frequency trading is? And they said, kind of, sort of, but the person who's walked through our office and has explained this world to us, and it is more shocking than you know, is Brad Katsuyama.
They actually said that.
Yeah.
They said Brad is the guy because he's going around trying to figure it out.
Yes. This young man who was then, when I first heard his name, I think he was still at the Royal Bank of Canada, had taken it upon himself to sort of find out how the stock market worked. I mean, that was the question.
Because he thought it was not working fairly.
Because he himself was a trader of stocks at the Royal Bank of Canada. He ran the stock market trading department at the Royal Bank of Canada. And in 2008, when all the craziness is happening in the financial sector, he notices a change in the market. And it's a profound change that up to that point, when he went to go buy 100,000 shares of Microsoft, and it was scattered across 13 public exchanges in New Jersey. He would look at his trading screens, and there'd be 50,000 shares of Microsoft offered at $20 a share, and he could hit a button, and he would get the shares. Starting around 2008, when he hit the button, the shares would vanish. He'd get a few, and then the price would go up. And it was as if someone knew, there was a ghost in the machine. Someone knew what he was trying to do before he actually got to do it.
And they did it, and
they did it and sold it back, and sold them at a higher price. That's right. So he first thought that it's like a computer glitch. He thought he was like banging the side of his machine and calling tech support. He thought it was his machine. Yeah. And it takes him a while to figure out, and visits to money managers and people who are in the stock market to realize it's a system-wide problem, that something has gone screwy in the market. What is it? And this is the story of the book. The story of the book is his investigation. Yeah. It's one man trying to figure out how this newly automated, this newly computerized stock market actually functions.
See, but that's a signal trait of yours. You go out and look at something that is problematical and maybe evil or maybe fraudulent or maybe illegal, any of those. And then all of a sudden you find some good guys trying to figure it out or trying to do better than the system.
Well, part of this is my own sloth and indolence, because if it was
you were slothful and indolent?
Well, in this sense, that if it were, if you left it to me to figure out what was going on in the stock market, I'd never figure it out. I needed someone to figure it out for me. And
you could tell their story better than they could.
And the fact that someone had bothered to do this Canadian person,
yeah.
Who had no business thinking I'm the one who's going to become the world's expert on how the United States stock market is actually functioning.
And we're talking about 2011-12, aren't we?
Well, his problems start in 2008.
Yeah. By
kind of late 2009, he's figured out a partial answer to his problem, and he figures out what happens. This is the amazing thing to me is, so he's sitting, his computer desk is his desk where he's trading desk is in southern Manhattan, and when he hits his button to say buy 50,000 shares of Microsoft, that signal is going up the West Side Highway, out the Lincoln Tunnel, and the first exchange it reaches is called the BATS exchange, which is created by high frequency traders.
Right.
and they pick up his signal. And
let me interrupt you 1 second, because it's going to that exchange, and then it's going to a whole bunch of other exchanges.
Right.
Yeah,
it's got to go through. It's light traveling through fiber.
Right.
It's like physical distance matters, and it happens to be the closest exchange. The high frequency traders are sitting there waiting to find out what he wants to do. They have built faster routes from that exchange to all the other exchanges. They race ahead of him. They buy the Microsoft
what he wants,
and then they sell it back to him at a higher price.
Yeah.
So
that's simple.
That's simple. But it's that simple. But it took him assembling a team of unlikely experts to figure out like where the fiber runs.
Man, I love Ronan Ryan.
Yeah, well, so Ronan Ryan is the person who pulls out the maps. He's like comes out of a manhole in New Jersey where he knows where all the fiber is laid. He has spent his life till then helping high-frequency traders get faster. But he doesn't understand the trading side of it. Ronan Ryan he's brought in by Brad, and the first thing he says is, the reason this is happening, he pulls out his maps, is that fiber runs like that, and it just gets there first, and they're waiting there.
So how did they get there first? Somebody asks. It's because they built their own fiber connection.
That's right. Everything. The high-frequency traders have set up their systems so that they can get. The minute they pick up the signal of what Brad is trying to do, or what any investor is trying to do, they can beat the ordinary investor to everything else in the market. And it's just one form of predatory activity that they're engaging in, but it's the first one he discovers. And he takes this first insight. I mean, he ends up discovering a series of forms of predatory activity, but he takes it. It's actually one of his many decision moments. I think of Brad Katsuyama as someone who was presented with a series of choices, and he made the right choices, and then he's now presenting the world with a choice. We'll get to that. But he could have just joined the band of brothers and become a high-frequency trader.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So he could have made money.
He unlocked the keys to the kingdom,
He
and
figured
so
out how to
he
do
could
it.
have gone into the kingdom rather than telling everybody else what the kingdom was like.
That's right. He's working for the Royal Bank of Canada. He could have just become one of the people who knew about this stuff.
He was already making millions. He was
already making millions of dollars a year. He could have made a lot more money.
Right.
Instead, his first reaction is, I'm going on a public information campaign. I'm going to go talk to money managers, people who manage the savings of ordinary Americans, and explain to them how their stock market looks rigged. And this is where the story, if you ask me kind of when I sort of clicked in and thought, this is a book, is when I realized that after a couple of years of his own private investigations, he had set himself up so he could walk into the biggest money managers in the country, tell them how the stock market was working, and their jaw was on the floor. So how does that happen?
Okay, just tell me, they're all surprised, because one of the questions I had for you was, hadn't people been looking into this? Hadn't this question occurred to other smart people before he did?
Yes. He just ends up with a more satisfying description and explanation than most other people. And he's still,
was he the only guy that was sort of near the answer?
Yeah, he was the only guy who was working at Wall Street who had hands on the sort of information you have inside a Wall Street bank that was willing to share that information.
And brought in people like Ronan Ryan and others.
A crowd of characters.
Whatever his name was.
Yes, a crowd of characters who could explain where fiber ran.
And so he walks into the smartest money managers.
He walks into people, I mean, not just, he walks into Bill Ackman's office, the hedge fund manager.
Right.
And Bill Ackman told me, he said, when he walked in, we knew something was wrong. Every money manager knew something was wrong. They knew that the market was no longer the market. It was an illusion. That whenever they tried to do something, it was as if the market knew what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And Bill Ackman said, I thought I had an insider trading problem. He said, I thought I had a leak. I thought when I wanted to go buy something.
Or somebody was tapping my lines or something.
He thought that's what the problem. He said it was bigger. They actually knew what I was trying to do kind of in the moment.
Yeah, but here's what is important to understand for me. It's a millisecond. It's not weeks later or hours later. They get that information seconds before the buy comes in.
Right. It's not seconds. It's the difference between the market that the investors, that ordinary investors, you, me, the guy with his 401k, Bill Ackman is seeing, the speed of that market, and the speed of the high frequency traders is just a couple of milliseconds. But that's plenty enough time from the computer's point of view.
Exactly. Everything else is
at
frequency.
One of the reasons that the world has organized itself this way so quickly, this kind of ecosystem has sprung up on Wall Street around high-frequency traders making these sort of scalping profits, is that people have a hard time getting their minds around
how fast,
how computer perceives time, how slow a couple of milliseconds is for a computer, that how much can be done in that amount of time. So it seems like everything just looks instantaneous. To the naked eye, when you are on your Charles Schwab account or on your E-Trade account and you're buying stock, you hit the button and say buy, it seems like you got it right away, right? But that's not what happened. What happened was your order got sold. The right to execute your order was sold by your broker to a high-frequency trader so they could exploit it. And the information value of what you're doing is being sold for, I mean, it's hundreds of millions of dollars a year business.
This is not your point in the book, but some people raise this question. There are proprietary lines going in. So a lot of people have paid for extra fast, extra special lines. Yes?
Well, each exchange, the public stock exchanges, the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, BATS, Direct Edge, whatever the exchanges, and there are 13 of them, a significant source of their revenues since the speed wars started has been selling special access, speed, to the high-frequency traders. So they supply the public sees prices at one speed.
Right.
The high-frequency traders see them, get a feed from the exchange, a direct feed, for which they pay a lot of money, $50,000
But they make a lot of money, so it's worth it.
Yes, right. That's right. So, I mean, if you back away from the ecosystem and look at just the money flows, the high-frequency traders pay the stock exchanges for special access, to actually locating their computers inside the stock exchange building as close as possible to the stock exchange, the actual computer that is the stock exchange. The exchanges pay the banks and brokers to direct direct orders onto the exchanges in a way that's disadvantageous to the customer. They can incentivize the banks with a curious fee structure to behave in ways that enable the HFT firms to exploit them. And then the HFT firms also pay the brokers for the right to execute orders. I mean, the incentives are all screwed up in the system. And the exchanges are owned, all the exchanges are basically owned by intermediaries. They're owned, so a stock market is supposed to it's got a purpose, right? It's supposed to generate, it's supposed to take investment dollars and get into the hands of productive enterprise. This whole,
it's a mean to allocate capital.
It's a means to allocate capital. This is a whole separate beast. It's a market run by intermediaries for intermediaries.
Okay, so we've got Brad Katsuyama who figures this out.
Yeah.
Now, was there anybody that he walked into? I mean, he went into some of the smartest people, some of the great investors of our time, some of them, and their jaws dropped, you said. Yeah. Did anybody say, I've known this, I've got this, don't,
People had versions of the story. They all had suspicions. So one hedge fund manager, president of a hedge fund, said to me, I thought I had a $300 million problem on a $9 billion fund. We figured that just the cost of this front running or whatever is going on in our execution costs.
So they knew it might have been front running. They
knew something was going on, but they just didn't know what it was or how it was being done, generally. I mean, people, as time goes on, the more and more people kind of, I mean, there's awareness grows. But he is, I mean, what happens is, so this goes beyond the spread of information, that the truth is that they feel this guy from the Royal Bank of Canada is the only one who's giving them the truth. So what he does is he starts to create trust, which is a scarce commodity on Wall Street these days. I mean, there are not a lot of guys from banks going into investors' offices, and at the end of it, they think, I got to talk to that guy again because he's the only guy I can trust. And so they're
sharing information that helps him put together the story too.
So it comes back. That's right. So they start to do tests on what brokers are doing with their orders. They start to contribute to his understanding of what's going on, and they push him. They say, what you really need to do is create a fair exchange for us to operate on.
Okay, before that, so he figures the game out. He's got what they're doing. Does he go to the Feds? Does he go to the SEC? Does he go to the Attorney General of New York? Does he go to anybody?
So he does. And but before I tell you how this happens, I got to tell you first this guy. So he's, I don't know, at the time he's 31, 32. He's young.
Right.
He's been in the States since 2002.
Sort of recently married or something?
Recently married, little baby. And like as far from a radical as you can imagine a person. He's Canadian. Not only is he Canadian, he's like conformist by Canadian standards. He's just, I mean, he does not want to be the leader of a movement.
Right.
He does not want to start a revolution.
He's not there to tear down the financial system.
And his colleagues thought of him as this really smart guy who played by the rules and who was likely to like run the Royal Bank of Canada one day. That's what he was going to do. And he has this kind of cause forced on him. Now, so he shows his superiors at the Royal Bank of Canada all this stuff, and they do say, before you start educating investors about how the stock market's rigged, we better go tell the SEC so they don't get angry at us. Yeah. And so they go to the SEC, and he said it was kind of incredible. He describes all of his findings, how he's being front-run and so on and so forth. And he said the room instantly was divided. There were older SEC guys who were staffers, who were upset, outraged, disturbed by what they were hearing. But the young SEC guys all seemed to be very sympathetic to the HFT, the high-frequency traders. Wow, that's so clever. They've kind of found a way to front it. You know, it was all legal. Yeah. And he left bewildered by this. So bewildered that the bank, actually, the Royal Bank of Canada did a study to find out how compromised the SEC was. And so this is a Canadian institution looking at American government. And they find, to their shock, that more than a couple of hundred SEC staffers in the previous few years had left the SEC to work for high-frequency trading firms or lobbying firms doing work for high-frequency trading. So he thinks, at that point, he gives up. He thinks,
I'm not going to get anything
I'm not going to get anything done there.
Right.
It's too complicated. And in any case, even if you look at it, even if you say everybody at the SEC is well-meaning, nobody's actually corrupt, they're trying their best, the truth is that whenever a new rule gets made, clever people seem to find a way to get around it. He had that view, too, that Wall Street would always find a way around the rules, so you should never place too much faith on government's role in all this. The question is there a market solution? Can you create incentives in the market for a fair market to arise?
So he says, I'll create an exchange.
I'll create a stock exchange. It takes him a while to figure that's what he needs to do. But he needs to quit his job at the Royal Bank of Canada and create the only fair exchange. But that's only part. And that's a technical problem. It's sort of like how you create an exchange on which no one who's trading on it is faster than the exchange. No one can find out what's happening there and race people to other exchanges and all that. So they wrestle with the technical problem, but bigger than the technical problem is the social problem, and the financial, social, political problem. All of this rigging in the stock market and the mishandling of customer orders and so on and so forth is only possible because investors don't pressure Wall Street. The investors themselves are not, they have a hard time figuring out what Wall Street banks and brokers are doing with their stock market orders. Very hard time getting the information. But even when they have some information, they hadn't been willing to start a fight. You know, the big money management firms have been reluctant to call up Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley and say, stop doing this, or we're not going to do business with you. Their interests were too intertwined. So Brad Katsuyama had to go to the world of American money, the people who handle ordinary American savings, and say, you have a responsibility. This is the problem. We're going to create a fair exchange, and now you have a choice. It's true. Up to now, you haven't had a choice. You call Goldman Sachs and yell at them. All the exchanges are a problem. It's not like there's one place they can go. We're creating a place where you're not going to get screwed, where you're not going to get front-run by high-frequency traders. Every dollar is going to stand the same chance. You now have to organize yourself and have a responsibility to sort of go to war with Wall Street. And this is when I heard this part of the story and watched this character in action, the story that kept coming to mind was Lord of the Rings. I felt like I was watching Frodo Baggins, organize the Fellowship of the Ring.
So he's got to figure out how to do this. And so what does he do? What's the means that he can create a level playing field?
So the technical thing they figure out is what they need to do is slow down high-frequency traders' ability to get information from their exchange and to trade and to respond to it. So what the high-frequency traders are doing at every other stock exchange is putting their machine right next to the stock exchange machine. Right. So they get fastest information out of the exchange and can respond to it. So they know prices before you and I know prices. So the way he does it is they call it the magic shoebox. They coil 60 kilometers of fiber optics inside of it looks like a shoebox. It looks like a big fishing reel inside of a shoebox. And so when a high-frequency trader tries to trade, instead of going right into their exchange, it goes boom, 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 boom around it. It slows it down. So the effect was to put them in somewhere way out in Long Island. I mean, if they effectively banished the high-frequency traders some distance. And then what they had to do was create a really, really fast route from their exchange to all the other exchanges. So if a customer order came on and to buy 10,000 shares of Microsoft, and they on their exchange only had 5,000 for sale, but there were some elsewhere, they could get to them before on behalf of the customer, on behalf of the investor, before the high-frequency traders could. So they went and dug essentially a high-frequency trading system in New Jersey for their exchange.
And guess who's investing in this new exchange? Goldman Sachs?
No.
No?
No. The importance, this is important. They identified as an important conflict of interest the fact that all the other exchanges are owned by brokers and high-frequency traders. Yeah. And so
they said will be owned by?
Will be owned by investors. Will be owned by big mutual funds.
Right.
Will be owned by, David Einhorn has an investment in it. People who are actually managing money, and all they want is a fair, honest place to buy and sell stocks. So there's no pressure to queer the game in favor of intermediaries. So what Goldman Sachs did, and this is where the story thickens to me, because Goldman Sachs clearly, at the time they're putting the Russian in jail for stealing their supposedly precious high-frequency trading code, they clearly think they're going to get in the high-frequency trading game. I mean, that's why they care so much about it. They clearly had a change of heart. And something's going on inside. I think something interesting is going on inside of Goldman Sachs right now.
And what do you think it is?
An argument about what our role in the society is. How can we function as an institution if people don't trust us?
And do you think they're losing the trust of the public at large?
I think
they lost it way back in 2008. They lost it way back. 2008.
And I think the question is, do they need to get it back? It's partly a practical argument. It's partly a moral argument. You can argue that reputation doesn't matter anymore. That all that matters is brute force in the financial system, and who cares whether people think we're screwing them or not.
But when Michael Lewis tells me there's a debate going on in Goldman Sachs, I assume someone has told him. Well, there's a roaring debate going on here, and we're trying to figure out who we are and what our role is.
Yes, and a microcosm of this debate is the argument around how they should behave in the stock market. And some new guys came in and took over Goldman Sachs' stock market business, trading and sales business globally. And they looked at the way Goldman had conducted itself. And they looked at the way the exchanges were arranged. They looked at the rigging in the market. And they said they had two observations. One is, there's basically a corruption here. I mean, it's basically a skimming, a scalping going on that's unpleasant, unsavory, and will look bad if anybody ever figures it out. But two, they thought, that the system, the stock market that has grown up, as it's structured, all these different exchanges, lots of complexity in each exchange, all designed for the benefit of high-frequency traders.
Technology is roaring ahead.
Roaring ahead. It's very unstable. And they said to me that the flash crash back in 2010, NASDAQ shutting down for hours, various outages at various exchanges. This is a pattern here. This is symptomatic, they said to me. They said, if we don't do something to repair the stock market, there's going to be a flash crash times 10, a calamity. And we know that if that happens, Goldman Sachs is one way or another going to get blamed. So what's the solution here? And they said the solution is this Canadian guy who's built this fair exchange that's quite simple, very robust, and we're going to throw our weight behind it. Now, inside of Goldman Sachs, that was not a universally popular decision. These new guys had come into Ron Morgan and Brian Levine are their names, had come in.
So they're not going to invest in the new exchange, but they're going to use the new exchange.
Just the opposite. They don't want to have any conflict.
Right.
What they're going to do is take their customers, their orders, ordinary investors' orders, and send them to the exchange and have them executed there, so they can't be exploited. So that costs Wall Street generally a lot of money. I mean, I don't know how much the take is every year, but $10–20 billion a year is being scalped. It's essentially unnecessary financial intermediation that's happening. high-frequency traders standing in between buyers and sellers when the buyers and sellers could very well come together at a better price for both without anybody in between.
And they're taking away $20 billion.
Whatever it is, they're going to take away lots of billions of dollars. So that, and some of that money would have been Goldman Sachs' money, one way or another. So it's a short-term decision. It's a decision to sacrifice short-term profits in their long-term
But you're
interests.
saying this is even a bigger decision and a bigger debate than simply high-frequency
Yes,
trading.
well,
it has to do generally with how we conduct our business.
I think that's
and what is at risk for us.
I think that's so. I think they figured out that their business is hard to do without people trusting them, and I think they figured out that they can't really compete as high-frequency traders for a lot of reasons. That this business, the high-frequency trading game, it's just done more effectively by small, nimbler groups of people than big banks. So they can't play in that game anyway. And I think they figured out that if at least in a stock market, if the whole stock market jumped onto Brad Katsuyama's exchange, if it all just ended up on IX, which is not inconceivable, Goldman Sachs would
be a very rich man.
would enjoy a relative advantage to a lot of the other banks because their advice is more valuable. They think they can compete on other ways. But I think the interesting thing is that this conversation is clearly taking place inside of Goldman Sachs in this market. And this,
how would you characterize the people who run Goldman Sachs then?
Brad Katsuyama taught me something because he had to go into all of these banks to try to persuade them to send them his exchange orders. And a lot of them really don't want to do it. They're doing whatever they can to torpedo the fair exchange. But if I were him, that would make me, I would be cynical. But he seems to think, and I think he's right, that the banks aren't monoliths. They're like different factions, different people that have different incentives within the bank. So these guys who are reformers inside of Goldman Sachs, now what are why are their incentives different? One, they have to face customers every day, and they know these customers. Two, they're older guys. By Wall Street standards, they're ancient. They're in their late 40s, and so their careers are at a different stage. They're less concerned about next year's bonus. And their bonus is not driven by how much Goldman Sachs' dark pool, which is their private estate, makes, that kind of thing. So they have a different incentive than maybe some other people in Goldman Sachs. And all the firms are that way. I think there are arguments inside all the firms of how we behave in the financial market. And I think Goldman is a harbinger. Goldman tends to lead the street. It's
the most powerful and the most respected.
Yes, I think everybody else looks at what Goldman's doing and is saying, why are they doing that? Now, I think it's fascinating that they've made this call to help reform the stock market at almost exactly the moment the New York Attorney General announces an investigation of high-frequency trading and the exchanges and all of this, and then the FBI reveals it has an investigation.
He was on television with me this morning, the Attorney General of New York, saying just that he'd been monitoring it, and now he was going to accelerate, what they were planning to do, but partly because of the conversation that's erupted because of your book.
This I don't know, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, yeah, okay.
I mean, I'm sure that these investigations have been going on for a while. It's just a question of how hot they get.
Just monitoring. I'm not sure about investigation. It may have been the word he used. Okay, so here we are. We figured this thing out in terms of and is there a dollar amount on how much the high-frequency traders were making because they could front-run this thing?
No, I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you that they've been that IEX, Brad Katsuyama's exchange, the research they've done has tried to generate some numbers. They've identified specific strategies, predatory strategies, and tried to determine just like how much might have been made from that one. And it's clearly many billions of dollars a year, but whether it's $8 billion a year or $30 billion a year, hard to know. And the only other way to kind of guess it, I mean, this is because it's private information. And these firms do not have to reveal how much they're making in the stock market or how they're making it. And some part of their activity will survive reform in the stock market. That there's no doubt some useful function that some high-frequency traders are performing, and it's different from shop to shop. But you can see things like how much they're spending for speed. and it's billions. I
Are
mean,
movie companies bidding on this already?
I don't know. I mean, it's only a day old, a day and a
There
half
hadn't
old.
been in anybody. That's another issue about this. Enormous secrecy about this book. It wasn't even in the catalog of Norton.
The book has mirrored its subject matter, hasn't it? I mean,
Yes.
the subjects all operate in such stealth. It's such the whole thing. I mean,
So the book was stealth because all the subjects were stealth.
well, the book ended up being a secret just simply because. I mean, the truth is that 60 Minutes decided they wanted to do something with it,
And they had their own rule.
And they had their own rule.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to let 60 Minutes have first crack at explaining this to the
What
world.
does being on 60 Minutes mean for a book like this? A great television program, in my judgment, obviously, but I'm biased.
So there are two things. One is Steve Croft, who did the piece, also did a piece on The Big Short,
Right.
and I watched him frame the conversation in a way that was that the television audience could completely grasp, and it was very useful. Made it easier for me to go talk about the book because people kind of got it. He made it visual, so it's a very big deal in terms of communicating what's in the story. I'm sure it sells a lot of books too, but I don't know how many.
Yeah. You really admire Brad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost as much as you view him as heroic as you view him as brilliant.
I think the bravery is the bigger component.
Bravery.
He's very smart, but I think he's an American hero. I mean, I do. But he and the people who he worked with, because they're people on Wall Street don't go after people on Wall Street. He's created a war on Wall Street, and he's done it in the best possible spirit. He could have happily stayed in his job at the Royal Bank of Canada and made millions of dollars a year very safely and ignored the world around him, and maybe one day ran the bank. He is not by nature a bomb thrower or whistleblower or anything. He's not. I mean, he's really not a radical.
But he did this while he was still working at the bank.
He did this. He conceived the idea while working at the bank, but he felt obliged, and in a very kind of touching way. And he's smart enough to know just how ostracized he might be if he went out on this crusade. I mean, he had to make the decision in his mind that if this doesn't work, I have to assume I'll never work on Wall Street again. And the only way it does work is if I assume I'll never work on Wall Street again. Yeah. And that's a big sacrifice for someone who's made it on Wall Street already. And you're young, and you got little kids and all the rest.
That was one part of his bravery. The other part is that he basically, which is, I think, morality. I'm not going to simply go do this myself because I understand it. I'm going to expose it and tell you why it's wrong.
Right. I'm going to try to tell the truth. I'm going to try to introduce simplicity, clarity, transparency to the financial markets.
You answered this last night. There was nothing illegal about this?
I don't know the answer to that. I think I don't know what is being done that is good. I mean, the Attorney General of the State of New York is going to try to figure out what's illegal about this. That may be different from what the SEC thinks is illegal. As far as I can tell you that the first defense of high-frequency traders, when you say, I mean, how do you justify this activity, is everything we do is within the bounds of the law. So I think they think they're operating completely within the rules, and they may, for all I know, they may be. But so this cast of characters who Brad Katsuyama surrounds himself with at IEX, they all make these. Ronan Ryan and Rob Park.
Christopher, there was one more name in there.
Well, it's John Schwal and Rob Park and Don Bolerman. There's a whole bunch of them, but they all of them have made a. It's not that they're saints. They are going to make money if it works out. Yeah. The odds are never great that it's going to work out. It's a risky thing to do. Even now. It's a socially risky thing to do. They put themselves at odds with their industry because they found something that bothered them about the industry. I thought that was great, that there were people on Wall Street who would rally to that kind of cause. And what was neat, there was a pattern there. Not all of them, but a lot of them are immigrants. A lot of them are people who, there's an Irishman, there's a Canadian, there's a Russian, there's Chinese, there are people who came to this country with an idea of how the country operated. And it's almost as if they're going to insist that the country operate the way they hoped it would. And I find it extraordinary. I find their behavior extraordinary.
Has anything that you have learned since the book and the 60 Minutes appearance changed anything in terms of your perception or the facts?
I'm a little stunned by the reaction to the book.
Which was the first question I asked you.
Yeah, no, just a little stunned by the reaction to the book. I feel like maybe some of the, I mean, here you have essentially a reform movement happening within Wall Street. I feel like in some way it's recaptured some of the energy of the Occupy Wall Street movement, but in the form of an active of disruptive entrepreneurship. But has anything? No, I haven't. Nothing. There's been no fact that I've learned that I thought, wow, I wished I'd known that. Or some people are going crazy. I mean, it's just there's a craziness about it. And
any accusations to you about you?
Yes.
Like what? Well, there was one story.
There was a story that there was a bank sent out an email saying I owned a stake in IEX.
Yeah, right, I saw that.
I've heard a number of things. I mean, look,
like
the rap on me.
Double check his facts and all that.
So let me.
What's the rap on you?
The rap on me is easy. If the rap on me is I only tell one side of the story. I told Brad Katsuyama's story. I didn't tell the high frequency trader side of the story. And what like people don't seem to grasp is that I actually go and interview dozens of high-frequency traders and people who work at exchanges and people in the banks. I am telling the story through the eyes of these characters who are trying to figure out how the market works because they're teaching the reader how the market works in their own journey. But I'm not ignorant of all the other points of view. And there is a passage in the book, a fairly long passage, that says that sort of like lays out what high-frequency traders would say in their defense. But it's not much. There's not much to say.
Well, what do they say in their defense?
Everything we do is within the bounds of the law.
Yes, that.
We add liquidity to the market.
Right.
When you hear a Wall Street person say liquidity, you should run for the exits. I mean, it's just like, what does it mean? What does it mean? What they do is they add volume to the market, but a front runner adds volume to the market. He buys from someone and sells to someone else, doubles the market, the volume in the market. We narrow spreads, which is, between the bid and the ask in the market. So they used to be much bigger, and now they're smaller, which is an indication of liquidity. But it's a deceptive claim because what really now spreads is the technology that enables spreads to narrow, and the market's an illusion. It's not, the spreads aren't the spreads. You go to act on the market and it moves. But so it's not like I don't know all the other sides of the story. I'm just trying to present the true side of the story. This isn't an on the one hand, on the other hand story.
Exactly.
Okay. It isn't. I mean, no sane person would walk into this and say there are two sides to this story and the other side's very compelling. The other side's not that compelling. That there's a lot of predatory activity going on in the stock market. This guy went and figured it out and demonstrated it in all kinds of ways. It's breathtaking. You should know this.
Yeah. There are two questions that come out of that. One, the point I raised earlier, is it much more widespread than just simply what we're talking about here in terms of the rigging of the U.S. financial system and Wall Street, in terms of how people can influence results, certainly in ways that give them a decided advantage that may be illegal.
Well, leave legality off to one side.
Okay.
The existence of these firms is a matter of market rigging. I mean, that they were all going down in the financial crisis. If market forces had been allowed to run their course in 2008, most of these big banks would be out of business.
Because the Federal Reserve and the
Department
of Treasury
stepped in
the government and saved them.
So what is that? That's rigging the market to save the firms. That's queering market forces.
That's not what most people think when you say rigging the market.
Right, but what I'm saying is that many people in their daily lives are subjected to market forces in a much more.
And nobody comes in and saves them.
Nobody comes in and saves them.
Yeah.
So
but at the same time, those who did it, Geithner's got a new book coming out called Stress Tests, which is going to be his side of what he did.
Yep.
And the argument will be, we saved the financial system,
may be
and
right.
we had to do that in order to benefit everybody, because if the financial system had collapsed, we would have all gone down, you, me, and everybody else.
You may be right.
Especially people.
There's an argument there was obviously a really good argument for doing it, but the point is that the people who are on the receiving end of that get a strange message. It's like someone who's badly parented. Yeah. It's like don't pay attention to what I'm doing, pay attention to what I'm saying.
Or it's like we'll let you fail unless you're too big to fail.
Right. So get bigger.
Yeah, get bigger. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Right. That's what you do. You get bigger.
Yeah, that's the old notion about if you've loaned $1 million to the bank, they're your partner. If you've loaned $100 from them, then you're a debtor.
Right. Yeah. So and so that from that, it's not that surprising that if the banks get on the one hand, if the message to the people inside is that you aren't subject to ordinary market forces, you won't fail, and then we will orchestrate things so your failure doesn't happen one way or another. It's not that surprising that they individually turn around and view markets as something to be fiddled with.
How long did it take you to write this book?
I started the first part, the gathering of the material, is a bigger process for me. So I started maybe September, October of 2012, and gathering stuff for it. I didn't start writing it until September.
Is the writing part easy for you? Because you are
the hardest part.
It's harder.
The hardest part is the structure for me, finding out how to tell the story. Once I get the voice and I figure out how the story sounds and how it's going to flow, where it's going to end, it goes pretty quickly. I go at a pace of about 20,000 words a month, which is pretty good.
This is very good.
Yeah.
But if in fact you have a character or more than one character, your life is, you have struck gold.
Right.
You struck gold with having Bradley, because you could tell his story of his search. That's everybody's dream of a great narrative.
True.
You take them on an adventure to solve a puzzle.
Yes.
That's what you did here.
That's exactly why I wrote the book. If I just found out on my own that the stock market was rigged, I wouldn't have been that interested.
You would have been an investigative reporter, and that's
right.
it. But it's the same thing with Billy Beane, right?
Yes.
It's
all the same.
This guy had a system.
Same thing with The Big
Will it
Short.
work? We've got to go in search of whether it will work and give the Oakland A's
Yeah.
a World Series
Yes.
win.
Yeah. It's
Same thing with The Big Short.
Same thing with The Big Short. People figuring out how this financial crisis, how the financial crisis happened, basically.
The other thing you read about, obviously, is your family, you being father and parent. What interests you now? You wrote the Vanity Fair piece on the president.
Yeah.
What interests you now, or how will you find your next subject? And when will you start looking?
Well, I know what I'm doing next. What I'm doing next is writing a drama for Showtime.
Oh,
about Wall Street set in the 1920s.
How was it then?
That period rhymes very nicely with this period, the period leading up to the crash of '29, and there's a way of, I think, writing about Wall Street now through then. But the subject matter for books starts usually with magazine articles, just like this one did. Started as a magazine article, it spiraled into something else.
And then with the guy the Russian who's in prison, will you go back to that story?
Well, he's in this, and he will. It's unlikely. He's now out of prison. His conviction was overturned. But so, no. The answer is no. I seldom go back.
Tell me how you end this story.
Well, the story opens with a guy, someone who's sensitive to the need for speed in the market, digging a straight line tunnel from the Chicago Mercantile Exchange to the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. With using $300 million of someone else's money.
And what was the name of his company?
It's called Spread Networks.
Exactly.
And the point was that the straight fiber optic cable would be the fastest way to transmit a signal between these two places. And at the end of the book, I go back and get on a bike and I ride a stretch of the cable through Pennsylvania and look up on the hills as I'm riding and notice that along the hills, kind of looming over the cable, are these microwave towers that have been put up very recently. And
why are they
high-frequency traders have figured out they can move a signal faster by microwave than in a fiber optics.
The cable buried in the ground.
Than the cable buried in the ground. And so that even though this tunnel was dug just 3 years ago, it's already slow.
Yeah, and there is also this intriguing question now, because of cyber. One is how fast the velocity of change within the world that you have been looking at, and how vulnerable is it to attack from someone who wants to disrupt the system?
That's true. You stick a shovel in the ground when the whole market is running in a cable. Yeah, maybe that's true. But I came away from this story with a different kind of feel, and it was we're our own worst threat. That it isn't some terrorist coming to disrupt our markets we have to worry about. It's ourselves. It's what we do what we do.
Out of avarice?
Out of opportunism. I guess it's greed. It's not just greed, but it's just a sense that a pursuit of success without thinking very much about the purpose of what one is doing. And so, anyway, we don't need any help from terrorists to screw up our financial markets. We do it all by ourselves.
When you look at this, is there any sense that you don't want to be defined as a financial writer? You wanted to be defined as somebody who's just curious about the way the world works.
I think that's closer. I think about myself.
Yeah.
And it's an accident that I'm a financial writer. I just happened to get a job at Solomon Brothers when I was 24 years old, and so people.
But out of that was born Liar's Poker.
Liar's Poker, and out of Liar's Poker was born The Big Short, and out of The Big Short was born this. And so I think that some of the books have it's just an accident of the direction my life took. But I don't think of myself. I never thought of myself as a financial writer. I just think of myself as a writer, and I can't tell you what the subject is.
And the world of finance, which you know, has provided rich material.
Very
rich material.
Yes.
Because it has everything in terms of big money, which brings jealousy and rage and revenge and all those other Shakespearean qualities.
This is one of the great arenas of American ambition, right? It's Wall Street, it's Silicon Valley, it's Hollywood. There are a handful of arenas of American ambition, and Wall Street is maybe the hottest of them. And so it does generate this material.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Lewis, the book is called Flash Boys, A Wall Street Revolt.